courtroom was full that morning, people whispering, shuffling papers, and waiting for the judge to come in. It was supposed to be a normal day, just another case in a long list. But when the big wooden doors opened, everyone turned to look. A small black girl walked in slowly, her steps quiet but steady. She looked too young to be there alone, maybe 16, wearing a simple white shirt and neat braids. Some people smiled softly, others whispered. Maybe she was lost. Maybe she was scared. But her eyes were sharp, calm, and full of something most adults didn't have: control. The bailiff called for silence as the judge entered. He was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes, known for being fair but a little proud. He looked at the girl, slightly confused. "Miss, where are your parents or your lawyer?" he asked kindly but firmly. The girl looked straight at him and said in a soft but steady voice, "Your Honor, I'm representing my brother. He didn't do what they say he did." The room went still. Some people almost laughed. The idea of a teenage girl speaking like that in court was shocking. But she didn't look nervous. She stood straight, holding a small folder full of papers. The judge blinked, half amused. "Representing your brother? That's a big statement," he said. "Do you know how serious this is?" The girl nodded. "Yes, sir. I do." There was no hesitation in her tone. It was the kind of answer that caught attention, quiet but strong. The clerk looked at her papers, then at the judge. Everything was properly written. She had actually filled all the legal forms herself. The judge raised his eyebrows. He wasn't sure if he should laugh or admire her. Everyone expected her to stutter or cry. But she didn't. She asked calmly for permission to speak, using words too precise for her age. "Your Honor, before we begin, may I show you something?" she said. The judge sighed, thinking this was going to be a waste of time, but nodded. She walked up to the bench and placed a thin notebook in front of him. Inside were notes, case numbers, and details of her brother's arrest that even the official file didn't have. She had handwritten everything line by line in perfect order. The judge frowned as he flipped through it. "Where did you get this information?" he asked. "From the public library, sir," she said, "and from the law books my mother left behind." Her voice softened for a second, and a shadow of sadness passed over her face. The judge's hand froze for a moment. "Your mother was a lawyer?" "No, sir," the girl said. "She worked as a paralegal. She used to help people who couldn't afford lawyers. She taught me that truth can protect you if you know how to use it." The courtroom went silent again. The judge leaned back in his chair, looking at her more carefully now. "You're quite something, young lady," he said. "But this isn't a game. Court is serious business." The girl looked right at him. "I understand, Your Honor. Truth is serious too." That line hit him unexpectedly hard. He stared at her, searching for fear in her eyes, but there was none. The prosecutor smirked. "Your Honor, are we really doing this?" "She's just a kid." The judge waved his hand. "Let her speak for a minute," he said. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe pride. He wanted to test her. So he leaned forward and said with a small smile, "All right then. Let's make this simple. Let's play a small game, truth or lie. I'll ask, you answer." The audience chuckled softly. It sounded like a joke, a way to lighten the moment. But the girl didn't laugh. She simply nodded, eyes serious. "I don't play games, sir, but I will answer truthfully." That confidence made the judge pause. For a second, it felt like the power in the room shifted. The girl, standing with her small folder and calm expression, somehow made the judge feel like he was the one being tested. The first question came like a tease. "You really believe you understand the law?" the judge asked. The girl replied, "Not all of it yet, but enough to know what's right and wrong." The second question came sharper. "Do you believe your brother is innocent?" Her answer was firm. "Yes, because the report has 2 mistakes." The room murmured. The judge blinked. "2 mistakes? Which ones?" She flipped a page in her folder and pointed. "The time of arrest doesn't match the surveillance camera footage." And the witness changed her statement twice. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. The judge looked down at his file. She was right. The girl was absolutely right. Slowly, the smirk on his face faded. He leaned back, studying her. The bailiff, the clerk, even the journalists in the back, all were staring at the same small girl who had just spoken like a trained lawyer. The judge cleared his throat. "You're full of surprises," he said quietly. The girl only smiled a little and whispered, "No, sir. I just learned to read what others don't want to see." The atmosphere in the courtroom had changed completely. The laughter and whispers were gone. What remained was silence and awe. The judge didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning of something extraordinary. A simple morning hearing was about to become a story that the whole city would talk about. A story of a young girl with a mind sharper than anyone imagined, and the courage to stand in front of power without fear. That day, no one left the courtroom the same, and the judge, who thought he had seen everything in his career, began to wonder if he had just met the smartest person to ever stand before him. The next morning, the courtroom was packed again. News had already spread about the little black girl who had stood alone before the judge and spoken like a lawyer. Some came out of curiosity, others out of disbelief. Reporters whispered in the back rows, ready with cameras and notebooks. But when she entered the room, she didn't look proud or scared, just calm. She carried the same small folder worn at the edges and sat down quietly. Her brother, sitting behind her in handcuffs, looked at her with worried eyes. She turned her head slightly and smiled. "It's going to be okay," she whispered. The judge entered with a different expression today. Yesterday he had treated her like a child. Today there was curiosity, even respect in his gaze. He cleared his throat and said, "Let's continue from where we left off." Then he leaned forward and added, half smiling, "I believe we were playing truth or lie, weren't we?" The audience chuckled, but the girl didn't. Her calm eyes met his again. "I don't play, Your Honor," she said softly, "but I will still answer truthfully." That sentence made the judge pause again. Something about her tone, quiet but fearless, made the air in the courtroom change. Even the prosecutor seemed more careful this time. He stood up, trying to break her confidence. "Miss, you said there were mistakes in the report yesterday. Do you even understand how police evidence works?" She didn't flinch. She opened her folder and showed a paper. "Yes, and this is the camera footage log. The arrest was at 9:45 p.m., but the report says 8:10 p.m. That means the witness couldn't have seen my brother at that time." The prosecutor frowned. "Where did you get that?" he asked. "It's public record," she said simply. "You just have to read it carefully." The judge glanced at the document and nodded slowly. It was real. A few people in the courtroom began murmuring again. Then the judge decided to test her himself. "All right," he said, tapping his gavel gently. "Let's make this interesting. I'll ask questions, truth or lie, and you answer. If you're wrong, I'll stop you right here. Deal?" The girl hesitated, then nodded once. The courtroom grew silent. Everyone wanted to see how far she could go. "Your brother was found near the store that was robbed," the judge said. "Truth or lie?" She didn't even look at her notes. "Truth," she said. "He was there, but not during the robbery. He was there earlier, buying medicine for our mother." "The receipt shows the time, 8:02 p.m. The judge's eyebrows rose. "And do you have that receipt?" She held it up carefully. The date and time matched perfectly. The second question came quicker. "The witness said she saw him running from the scene." "Lie," she said. "The camera across the street recorded someone else in a gray hoodie. My brother's jacket is blue." The police didn't check the second angle. The prosecutor tried to object, but the judge stopped him. "Let her finish." The judge leaned forward again, curiosity now turning into quiet admiration. "You're saying the police missed evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor. Because no one listened when I told them. I even went to the station, but they laughed." Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes showed a mix of pain and strength. The judge looked down at the file again, his hand resting on his chin. "You've done your homework," he said softly. "I had to," she replied. "If I don't, my brother loses everything." For a moment, the judge forgot he was the authority in the room. The way she spoke reminded him of the first time he stepped into a courtroom, hungry to prove himself, believing that truth always wins if you fight hard enough. He sighed. "You've got spirit," he said. "Maybe too much for your age." "I got it from my mother," she replied. "She said the truth needs someone brave to speak it." The audience was silent. Every eye was on her. The game that started as a joke was now a test of justice itself. Then something unexpected happened. The judge asked one last question, softly, almost like he wanted to know the answer for himself. "And what if truth isn't enough, child? What if power decides what's right?" The girl looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Then I'll learn the law until power has to listen." That answer hit him like a hammer. The entire courtroom felt the weight of her words. There was no sound for a full minute. The girl didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just looked down at her papers again, ready to continue. The judge finally spoke, his voice lower now. "Miss Carter," he said gently, "I think we're done playing. From this point on, you will be treated as the official representative of your brother." The clerk gasped. The prosecutor frowned in disbelief. "But the girl?" She simply nodded. She had won more than an argument that day. She had won the judge's respect. And outside, as the reporters rushed to send their headlines, one line began to spread across every news outlet. Judge challenges teen and truther lie and loses to illegal prodigy. But for her, it wasn't about fame. It was about her brother, her mother's memory, and the promise she made to fight for truth no matter who sat behind the bench. And this was only the beginning. The courtroom was never the same after that day. By the time Part 3 began, the third hearing, the room was overflowing. Journalists filled every corner. Cameras lined the back, and people who had never cared about court cases before now came just to see her. The girl who had faced a judge, corrected a prosecutor, and stood for her brother like a lawyer twice her age. They whispered her name now, Amara Carter. When she walked in that morning, even the guards stood a little straighter. She was wearing the same simple clothes as before, but there was something new in her eyes, focus sharper than steel. Her brother Marcus smiled weakly from the defense bench. "You don't have to do this alone," he whispered. Amara smiled back. "I was never alone," she said softly. The judge entered a few minutes later, but this time the respect in his eyes was clear. He no longer saw a child standing before him. He saw an opponent. A worthy one. The crowd quieted as he tapped his gavel. "Court is now in session." The prosecutor was ready this time. His voice was louder, his words faster, and he carried new files in his hand. "Your Honor," he began, "we have additional evidence against the defendant. A new witness came forward last night." He looked straight at Amara with a smirk. "Let's see how the young lady handles this." Amara took a deep breath. She didn't speak right away. She listened carefully, every word, every pause. The so-called new witness was a man who claimed to have seen Marcus running from the store, holding a bag. The prosecutor played a grainy video on the screen. "There," he said proudly, pointing. "You can see it clearly. Same build, same hair." Everyone stared at the blurry figure. For a few seconds, even the judge looked uncertain. Amara slowly stood up and walked toward the screen. Her voice was calm when she spoke. "May I ask a question, Your Honor?" "Go ahead," the judge said. She pointed to the timestamp on the video. "This says 9:12 p.m., she said softly. "But the street camera on the other side of the block recorded my brother walking home at 9:14 p.m., 3 blocks away." The prosecutor frowned. "You're assuming—" "I'm proving," Amara interrupted, still polite but firm. "Because the footage you showed doesn't match the angle or lighting. Look here." She zoomed in on the reflection in the store's glass window. The audience gasped. The reflection showed a light post that didn't exist on that street anymore. It had been removed months ago. "This video," she said, turning to the judge, "is from an old recording. It's been edited." The courtroom exploded in whispers. The judge held up his hand. "Order," he said, his voice echoing. He looked at the prosecutor sharply. "Is that true?" The prosecutor stammered. I received this from the local station this morning." Amara didn't stop. She walked back to her table and opened a thick envelope. "I went to that same station last night," she said. "I asked to see the original footage. They told me someone had checked it out hours before and never returned it." She placed a signed record slip on the table. The signature was the same as the prosecutor's assistant. The silence that followed was cold and heavy. The prosecutor turned pale. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting evidence was tampered with?" he asked. "I'm not suggesting," Amara said quietly. "I'm proving." The judge leaned back in his chair, studying her. For a moment he didn't speak. The bailiff handed him the slip. He read it twice, then looked up at Amara. "You're very brave," he said slowly. "You realize what you're accusing the court of?" Amara nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. But truth doesn't change, even if someone hides it." The crowd was silent again. Every pair of eyes followed her as she sat down. Her brother was trembling, half from fear, half from pride. She reached out and squeezed his hand. "We're close," she whispered. The judge called for a recess. As people filed out, reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed. and her name echoed in every headline that afternoon. Teen outsmarts prosecutor. Exposes fake evidence in court. Outside the courthouse, Amara stood alone for a moment. The autumn wind tugged at her braids. She looked at the tall gray building and whispered, "Mom, I hope you're watching." Back inside, the judge sat quietly in his chambers, holding the evidence slip. "That girl," he murmured. "She's not just smart, she's dangerous. In the best way." By the time the court reopened that afternoon, the prosecutor's assistant had already confessed to altering the footage. The fake video was thrown out. The judge turned to Amara. "You just saved your brother's life," he said softly, but Amara didn't smile. "Not yet," she said. "Until he's free, I still have work to do." And as she sat down adjusting her papers, the judge realized something profound. This girl wasn't just defending her brother. She was fighting for every person who had ever been silenced, doubted, or dismissed because they didn't have power. The courtroom had seen many cases before, but never one like this. A child standing alone, armed only with truth, and a mind that could outthink everyone in the room. And deep down, the judge knew this wasn't the end. It was just the calm before the storm that would change everything. The next hearing began under storm clouds, both outside and inside the courthouse. Rain tapped against the tall windows as people filled the courtroom once again. This time it wasn't just locals. Reporters from national channels had arrived, calling it the trial of the teen genius. Cameras flashed as Amara Carter walked in, holding her worn folder close to her chest. Her face looked calm, but there was something deeper in her eyes, a quiet sadness mixed with unshakable purpose. Her brother, Marcus, smiled weakly when she sat beside him. "You don't have to carry all of this," he whispered. Amara shook her head. "It's already mine to carry," she said softly. "I promised Mom I'd never let the truth die." When the judge entered, the courtroom fell silent. His expression was thoughtful now, almost protective. He tapped the gavel once. "Court is in session," he said, then looked at Amara. "Miss Carter, you may continue." She stood slowly and faced the judge. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear. "Before we go forward, I need to share something personal, because it connects to this case." The prosecutor rolled his eyes. "Here we go again," he muttered. The judge frowned. "You'll let her speak." Amara nodded, opened her folder, and pulled out an old photograph. It showed a smiling woman holding two children, Amara and Marcus, years younger. "This is my mother," she said softly. "She worked as a paralegal in the same city. She used to help people who couldn't afford lawyers. One day she took on a case against a powerful businessman who had bribed police to hide evidence. She won that case, but days later our home was burned. The file was gone. My mother, she didn't survive the fire." The air in the courtroom grew heavy. Even the prosecutor lowered his eyes for a moment. Amara continued, voice trembling but steady. "Before she died, she told me something. She said, 'Don't let truth scare you, even if it costs you everything.' So I learned the law from her old notebooks. I studied every case she left behind. And one of those cases, Your Honor, is connected to this one." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Amara placed another paper on the bench. "This police officer," she said, pointing at a name, "was involved in my mother's last case. He also signed my brother's arrest report. Same man, same pattern. The same missing evidence and changed statements." The judge blinked, stunned. "Are you suggesting corruption within the department?" "I'm suggesting," Amara said firmly, "that the same man who destroyed my mother's case is now trying to destroy my brother's." Gasps filled the courtroom. The prosecutor jumped to his feet. "Objection. This is outrageous." The judge banged his gavel. "Sit down," he ordered sharply. His gaze turned to Amara. "Do you have proof?" Amara nodded and handed over a letter. Old, faded, but real. It was written by her mother to the local court, complaining about false police reports signed by the same officer. "She never got to submit it," Amara whispered. "It was found in her desk drawer after she died." The judge read the letter slowly. The courtroom was silent except for the rain tapping the windows. When he finished, he looked up, his eyes softer now. "Miss Carter, this is serious evidence." "I know, Your Honor," she said quietly. "That's why I came here myself. Because no one else would listen." The judge leaned back, deep in thought. The prosecutor tried to recover, but his voice trembled slightly. "This is just coincidence. It doesn't prove anything. But before he could say more, the door at the back of the courtroom opened. A woman in uniform stepped inside. "Your Honor," she said, walking forward. "I'm Detective Monroe. I was part of that case years ago. What this girl is saying, it's true. We all knew something was wrong, but nobody spoke up." The judge's face hardened. The prosecutor froze. Amara didn't move. She just closed her eyes for a second, whispering under her breath, "Thank you, Mom." The judge finally spoke. "Court will take a short recess. I need time to review this evidence." As the gavel struck, the room broke into noise. Reporters rushing out, people gasping, some cheering quietly for the girl who had just exposed a buried secret. Amara sat down slowly, her hands trembling now. Marcus reached over and squeezed them. "You did it," he said. She smiled faintly. "Not yet," she whispered. Truth always fights back before it wins. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart, and sunlight began to slip through the glass windows. Amara looked up at the light, her heart heavy but proud. She wasn't just fighting a case anymore. She was reopening her mother's war against the lies that had stolen everything from her family. And for the first time, the judge understood that this wasn't just a teenage girl with high IQ. It was the daughter of a woman whose spirit refused to die. The fifth hearing felt different from all the rest. The courtroom wasn't just filled with reporters now. It was filled with tension, like a storm waiting to break. The story of Amara Carter, the teenage legal prodigy, had spread across the city, even the nation. Some people called her a hero. Others said she was too young to be challenging the system. But that morning, as she walked through the heavy wooden doors, her steps were slower, her face tired. The fight was wearing on her, but her fire hadn't dimmed. Her brother Marcus was already seated at the defense table, chains around his wrists. He smiled weakly as she sat beside him. "They're scared of you," he whispered. Amara gave a small grin. "Good, that means they're finally listening." When the judge entered, everyone stood. He didn't look like the same man from the first day. The sharpness in his tone was gone, replaced by something deeper. Respect, even admiration. "Court is now in session," he said quietly. But before Amara could even open her folder, the prosecutor slammed a file onto the table. "Your Honor," he announced, "the defense's young representative has overstepped her boundaries. She's accused a police officer, disrupted court proceedings, and brought forward unverified claims. I request that she be removed from the case." The courtroom gasped. The words hit like thunder. Amara froze for a second, then slowly stood. Her voice was calm but full of strength. "Your Honor, may I respond?" The judge nodded. "Proceed." She took a deep breath, her small hands trembling slightly as she held up a single document. "This," she said, "is an official complaint file, signed by Detective Monroe herself this morning, confirming that the officer I mentioned was under investigation for evidence tampering 10 years ago. The case was buried, but it's still on record. It means everything I said was true." She handed the paper to the judge, who read it silently. The prosecutor's face turned pale. Amara continued, her voice rising with every word. "You said I overstepped. But how far is too far when someone's life is on the line? When the truth is ignored because it's spoken by a young black girl who isn't supposed to know the law?" The entire courtroom fell silent. Even the judge looked down, ashamed. Amara stepped closer to the bench, her voice steady now. "My mother told me that law is not about age, color, or power, it's about truth. And if truth makes people uncomfortable, then maybe they've been too comfortable with lies." The judge leaned back, staring at her in awe. She had just turned the courtroom into a lesson. The prosecutor opened his mouth to reply, but before he could, the door burst open. A man in a police uniform entered hurriedly, holding a folder. "Your Honor," he said breathlessly, "we found the original footage from the store's security system. It was hidden in a locked drawer at the station." He handed it over. The judge motioned for the bailiff to play it. The large screen flickered on. The video showed the robbery clearly, but the person running out of the store wasn't Marcus. It was the police officer who had made the arrest. Gasps echoed around the room. The judge's eyes widened. The prosecutor dropped his pen. Amara didn't speak. She just stood there silent, watching as the truth finally revealed itself. Her brother's head fell into his hands, tears streaming down his face. The judge finally spoke, his voice trembling. "Miss Carter, you were right." Amara blinked back tears. "No, Your Honor. My mother was. The room erupted in applause. Some people stood up, cheering softly. The judge let them. For once, he didn't call for silence, but then he raised his gavel. "Order," he said gently. "The court will review the evidence. Until then, the defendant, Marcus Carter, is to be released under protection. This case will continue, but not as a trial of guilt, rather as a trial of truth." Amara looked at her brother as the guards removed his cuffs. He stood shakily, his eyes red but smiling for the first time in months. She stepped forward and hugged him tightly, whispering, "I told you I'd bring you home." Reporters shouted questions, flashes filled the room, and the judge quietly stood watching her. In all his years on the bench, he had never seen someone fight like this, not with power or title, but with truth and heart. As the courtroom emptied, the prosecutor gathered his papers, silent and pale. The detective who had lied was escorted away, and Amara sat alone at the defense table, staring at her mother's old notebook. On the first page, written in fading ink, were the words, "Justice may sleep, but it never dies." She smiled, closing the notebook gently. The battle wasn't over. There were still hearings left, more lies to uncover. But for the first time, the world was on her side. Outside, the rain had stopped again. Sunlight streamed through the courthouse windows, falling directly on her face as if the universe itself had bowed to the truth she fought for. And somewhere deep inside, Amara whispered, "Mom, I kept my promise." The sun was bright that morning, but the courthouse felt heavy, like it carried the weight of every lie ever told inside it. Part 6 began with quiet footsteps. Amara Carter walking through a hallway lined with reporters. Cameras flashed, microphones reached out, and voices called her name. "Miss Carter, how does it feel to expose corruption? Are you really only 16? Do you plan to study law now?" She didn't stop for any of them. She just walked straight ahead, her mother's worn notebook clutched in her hands, her brother walking beside her, finally free of chains. His freedom was only temporary. The judge had called this last hearing to decide whether all charges would be dropped. One mistake, one misstep, and everything could fall apart again. Inside the courtroom, the judge looked more tired than before. The walls themselves seemed to echo with the truth that had finally come out. The prosecutor sat silently, his usual arrogance gone. A new team of investigators had arrived, and the officer who had framed Marcus was now behind bars. But there was one last thing left, a hidden piece of the puzzle no one had dared to touch. When the gavel struck, the judge's voice was calm but serious. "Miss Carter, before I make my final ruling, you said there's still more we should know. Please, the floor is yours." Amara stood slowly, her heart pounding. She opened her mother's notebook and flipped to the final page, one that had been glued shut until she peeled it open last night. "Your Honor," she began softly, "my mother's last case file before the fire was about a missing testimony. It was supposed to prove police corruption. I found that testimony. It was hidden in this notebook all along." Gasps filled the room. Even the judge leaned forward. "Go on," he said. Amara took a deep breath and began to read. The testimony described how several officers, including the same man who arrested Marcus, had been part of a bribery ring protecting local businesses in exchange for false reports. Her mother had discovered it and paid the price. Tears shimmered in Amara's eyes, but her voice stayed steady. "My mother died for this truth, and my brother almost went to prison for the same crime she tried to expose." The judge rubbed his temples. "This isn't extraordinary." He looked at her with deep emotion. "Miss Carter, what you've done, no lawyer, no adult I've seen has ever done with such bravery." The prosecutor finally spoke, his tone low. "Your Honor, the defense has shown overwhelming evidence of manipulation. I withdraw the charges." The judge nodded. "Then it's settled. Marcus Carter is officially cleared of all accusations." The courtroom exploded in applause. Some people cried. Even the bailiff smiled. But Amara just stood there, frozen. Her lips trembled as her brother pulled her into his arms. "It's over," he whispered. "You did it." But Amara shook her head slightly. "It's not over," she said quietly. "Because truth isn't just something you find, it's something you keep alive." She walked up to the judge's bench and handed him her mother's notebook. "Please," she said, "don't let her story die again." The judge looked at the notebook as if it were sacred. "I promise," he said softly, "this will be entered into record permanently. Your mother's name deserves to be remembered." When the gavel fell for the last time, The sound echoed like thunder, the sound of justice finally waking up. After the hearing, Amara and Marcus stepped outside into the sunlight. The air smelled clean after days of rain. Reporters surrounded them again, but this time Amara stopped. She smiled gently and said, "This wasn't just my story. It was my mother's, my brother's, and everyone's who ever lost their voice. I just made sure the truth got to speak." Her words went viral within hours. News headlines called her the girl who rewrote justice. Universities sent her letters of scholarship offers. Lawyers sent messages of admiration. And yet that night when she returned home, Amara sat quietly by the small framed photo of her mother, whispering, "We did it, Mom. You can rest now." But as she stared out the window at the sleeping city, her mind didn't rest. She knew there were more like her mother, people silenced, forgotten, buried under lies. And she promised herself that one day when she was old enough, she'd come back to that same courtroom. Not as a girl, but as an attorney. For now, she just smiled at the stars and whispered to the night, "Justice never sleeps again." A year had passed since the courtroom that shook the city, but people still whispered the name Amara Carter. The girl who faced a judge, outsmarted lawyers, and changed the law without a license. What had begun as a desperate fight for her brother had turned into something much bigger, something that would echo far beyond those wooden walls. The story opens again on a quiet morning. The same courthouse stands tall, but this time, the halls look different. New faces, new plaques, new energy. The system had changed because of her case. Corruption had been rooted out, policies rewritten, and young people across the country had started studying law because they heard about the teenage prodigy who refused to bow. And that morning, as the sun poured through the tall glass windows, the heavy doors opened once again, and Amara stepped inside. But this time she wasn't there to fight for someone. She was there as someone. Her long black hair was tied neatly, her steps calm but powerful. A new nameplate shone beside the courtroom door, Attorney Amara Carter. The same judge who once doubted her was now sitting at the bench, older, prouder, and smiling faintly. "You made it," he said as she approached. Amara smiled back. "You told me once that law was serious business," she said. "I wanted to make it mine." The courtroom filled again, just like before, reporters, spectators, and law students. They all wanted to see her first official case. It wasn't a big one, not compared to what she'd faced before, but it mattered. A poor immigrant mother had been accused of neglect because she couldn't afford proper childcare while working 2 jobs. No one wanted to take her case. Amara did. As the trial began, Amara stood tall behind the defense table. Her voice had matured, calm but commanding. "Your Honor," she began, "sometimes the law forgets the people it was made to protect. My client is not guilty of neglect. She is guilty of surviving in a system that doesn't help her." The words rippled through the courtroom like a wave. The judge nodded slightly, remembering the day she'd said almost the same thing years ago. Truth doesn't change, even if someone hides it. She presented her evidence carefully, using the same method she had once used as a girl. Every paper checked, every fact precise. When the mother cried silently beside her, Amara placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Don't worry. Truth has a voice again." Hours passed. The prosecutor argued fiercely, but Amara stayed calm, countering every claim with logic, facts, and quiet conviction. When she finished her closing statement, the courtroom stood still. The same silence that had once followed her words years ago filled the air. Again, the silence that comes when people realize they're witnessing something unforgettable. The judge took a deep breath before speaking. "This court finds the defendant not guilty." The mother collapsed into tears, whispering blessings, and the room erupted in applause. Reporters started writing even before the gavel fell, but Amara didn't celebrate. She simply turned to her client, smiled softly, and said, "Go home to your children. They need you." Later that day, as the sun dipped low, she walked out of the courthouse and sat on the steps where she once waited nervously as a teenager, the same steps where she had cried, fought, and dreamed. She opened her mother's notebook, now restored, with clean pages added, and wrote a single line. "Justice begins when one person refuses to be silent." As she looked up, she saw the judge standing at the doorway watching her. He called out gently, "Miss Carter, what will you do next?" Amara smiled, closing the notebook. "There's still too much truth left to find," she said. "And I intend to find it all." The old judge nodded. Then may the law walk beside you. She stood, her long coat swaying in the breeze, the city lights glowing behind her. The same courtroom that once tested her had now become her battlefield of choice. And as she walked down the courthouse steps, no longer the scared girl with trembling hands, but a woman forged by truth. One thing was clear. She wasn't done making history, because legends don't fade when the trial ends. They begin where justice finds a new name, and hers was Amara Carter, the girl who taught the world that truth, when spoken with courage, could change everything.